Hello and welcome to episode 1 of season 2 of Back to Britpop. It's me, Chris. Got a cracking episode lined up for you today. Speaking to James McColl of the Supernaturals, one of the hardest working bands in Britpop. Hailing from Glasgow, the band was signed in 1996 but have some amazing singles under their belt. James is really funny and has me in hysterics at some points during the podcast. Before we get cracking with the interview, just some housekeeping to get out of the way. Those of you new to the podcast, thanks very much for tuning in and listening. It's been fantastic to have you on board. Your support is greatly appreciated. If you can, find time to rate and write a review on Apple iTunes. That really helps. Those of you who listen to the season 1 will know that I bang on about that every episode. Also, if you'd like to support me financially, I do this all off my own back with no sponsorship. But if you'd like to say thank you for that, there's a Ko-Fi page you can get involved with, which is in the podcast description notes. And that links you to like a buy me a coffee type of thing. It's £3. It's a one-off payment thing. You don't have to commit to anything. Social media, just search for Back to Britpop. But that's enough waffle. Let's hear from James about the Supernaturals. I'll be back at the end. Welcome to the podcast, James. How are you?
I'm good.
Whereabouts are you in the country?
I live in Stirlingshire, which is north of Glasgow. It's not really Glasgow, it's the countryside, really. I live out in the middle of nowhere, really.
I daren't say it, but how's your lockdown experience been for 2020 and beginning of this year?
Just same as everybody's. Just everybody's getting tired of it. I was getting tired of it in April, so it's just been going on forever.
Obviously, you've missed certain aspects of life more than others, like interaction or gigs or anything particular that's been really frustrating for you.
Well, we kind of were rehearsing in the summer there once it was okay to rehearse. So I think it was okay anyway. None of us got COVID, so we rehearsed from sort of August through to sort of November when it started to come back again.
Yeah.
And we were doing music for about 3 months, kind of like working on new songs and stuff. It was really enjoyable for those 3 months. And then we did this thing for Paul Quinn, a guy who used to play the drums at Teenage Fan Club, was putting this thing together for one of these benefit concerts where you go and you play in a kind of facility that's COVID protected, and it was all like a sound stage and all that. So we did something there before Christmas, and then everything stopped.
Yeah.
Just as did that.
Is this the original band lineup of that you've managed to get together?
No. It's the original band that got back together a few years ago, because our original drummer Gavin, who was in the band long before we signed to EMI, he chucked it about half a year before we signed to EMI. So Alan then came in and did the drums, but Gavin's the drummer now. So Gavin's the original drummer, Mark's the original bassist, but Derek kind of came back, and then he just basically couldn't really be bored with the rehearsing. Didn't really like having to rehearse on a Sunday. He had the hangover and stuff like that. So Derek, he'll probably come back at some point, but at the moment he just doesn't really want to do it. He's like kind of had enough. He doesn't want to get in vans and drive and play gigs as well, which I kind of don't blame him either.
Yeah. So going back a bit, James, if you don't mind, I just wanted to find out a bit more about you and how you got into music and maybe what kind of music you were listening to growing up.
Well, I sort of thought about this a lot because I keep getting asked about it now. And when the band was like out in the 90s and the noughties, early noughties, I wasn't really too bored about it. But I suppose it would just have been, a lot of the stuff that me and Derek and Gavin were listening to in the 80s when we were kind of like formative influences, things like the Monkees and Slade and The Move, and a lot of sort of soul music like Marvin Gaye and dub reggae and stuff like that. Really, it wasn't kind of music from the 80s.
No.
It wasn't the music at the time. And the stuff, all the 60s stuff like the Beatles and so on, that wasn't really, nobody was really into that. And we had this little thing, and we were right into it. Like, we'd get drunk on a Friday night after our work or after uni, and like listen to things like the Flaming Groovies and the Move and Slade and Mott the Hoople and a whole lot of other things like that. Really, XTC, just all those kind of bands. And I suppose that was what we were really into. And when we sort of started the band, that was kind of what we wanted to emulate. We had no interest in trying to sound like I don't know, Deacon Blue or Hue and Cry or any of those kind of bands. Our thing was just a kind of a guitar thing, really. And I think actually there was quite a lot of people in Britain in the early 90s who were doing what we were doing, but just doing it in different cities and so on, you know?
Yeah, yeah. So do you think that's helped or contributed to that kind of eclectic sound that you had, that kind of melting pot of different styles and deliver, kind of like the delivery is quite unique in terms of your sound, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, I've always listened to I still listen to lots of different types of music and things. And I mean, like the last few weeks, I've been listening to, let me think. I mean, I've got a playlist on my iPod, and it was a bit of Echo and the Bunnymen, Brandenburg Concertos, Joe Rawls, Judas Priest, stuff like that. It's just all kind of like all sorts of different things, you know. And I've always been into different types of music. I've never really been into, well, I've been into certain types, but I've always been open to listening to lots of things. Yeah, I suppose that if you listen carefully, and I could tell you what all our influences were from each song, but I think every band's like that, really.
Yeah, yeah. And so in terms of writing then, was it kind of like a joint effort for you guys, or was there kind of like a main songwriting, someone in charge of like the main lyrics and tune, or was it something collaborative?
Well, most of the time it's always me in charge of the lyrics and the top line melody. But so there's lots of songs where I've written completely myself. And there's also some really good songs where Ken, the old keyboard player, used to write. He'd write these kind of things on piano, and then I would come into the rehearsal room and say, "What's that, Ken? That's pretty good." And I would just have an idea for a song, and off we go. And so me and him wrote quite a lot of good songs between us, like Everest and Pie in the Sky and stuff like that. And Derek occasionally used to write songs, but he wasn't very prolific. But he wrote a song called Life's a Motorway, and a couple of songs on the last couple of albums and stuff. So, but Derek never really sort of, the way it worked in the band was whoever had the best song and the best idea, that kind of won out.
Yeah.
We weren't precious about it. It was more just whatever was best, that was it. And the producers would always do that. You know, they would go whatever was the best song, the best lyrics. But I mean, there's songs where different members of the band, like Alan and Mark, have contributed stuff and have got songwriting credits, you know.
Yeah, yeah. And in terms of like content of the song and where you were coming from in terms of lyrics as well, where were you drawing from like most of your kind of inspiration from there? Because it's not like a traditional, I would say you don't have a palette of traditional songs, if you see what I mean.
Yeah. Well, I don't really know how that started. I think maybe when I first started writing songs, they were really bland, and I wasn't really writing my own songs, and I just started kind of incorporating my own life into songs or things I'd read in books or phrases from TV and things that people had said. I sort of funneled that into songs and then started using my own style of lyrics, which was kind of like, I suppose a lot of it's from my life, but some of it isn't. And that's kind of how we arrived at that kind of style. Obviously the people I really like, lyricists like, say, Ray Davies or Morrissey or even Jarvis Cocker and people like that, you know, they obviously, you know, you're having an inspiration from really good lyricists, but you just have to kind of get your own thing together. And, if you were writing a book, people always say, write the book about yourself. You know, so it's kind of similar with songs. You know, you've kind of got to just write about your own experiences and your own kind of vocabulary and your own way of looking at life, really.
And do you feel you had something a little bit different to offer at the time? Because I definitely feel that in terms of listening to your music, there was certainly something you would definitely put you in a certain type of mood. And were you conscious that that's what you wanted to deliver?
Well, I don't know if we were conscious of it, because a lot of what you do, we didn't really think we were artists back in the day. We just thought we were musicians that kind of banged out songs. But looking back on it now, as an older guy, yeah, we probably were artists. And yeah, that we had this kind of lyrical vibe. It was sort of, I suppose, slightly kind of making fool of yourself, but also could be very serious at times as well. And I think a lot of people kind of got mixed up between the fact that when we played live, we were very kind of up and kind of good time band, and they didn't like really listen to the lyrics, you know. I mean, the lyrics to something like "Smile" is quite dark actually when you go back and listen to it. You know, the actual words. Because it's just for me, if you're playing these songs and doing gigs, you don't really listen to the words anymore. It's just sort of sounds, you know. But if you stopped and looked at it written on a bit of paper, it's actually quite sad.
Yeah.
I must have been quite a sad young man at the time.
Yeah. I think that's a lot of the sort of analysis that's been put on like the Smiths in terms of, you know, the music's very uplifting and the lyrics have always tinged was like that darkness. And I definitely get what you're saying in terms of, you know, that forcedness of Smile is really clever. Do you think you gave yourself enough credit back then for those songs?
No, because the band we used to just mercilessly take the piss out of each other all the time, and anyone who got above themselves and even called themselves an artist would get humiliated. Because most of us were quite witty, so it was always quite a kind of a good environment, but it was also good, you know, you get put down if you got a bit ahead of yourself and stuff. But yeah, going back to sort of the Smiths, for me, the Smiths were such an important band, not so much musically, but lyrically for that whole 90s era Britpop thing. You know, so many of the, you know, like Blur and Pulp and ourselves and loads of bands, you know, you can hear Morrissey coming through lyrically, that kind of, you know, way of looking at the world. I mean, he's gone a bit mental recently, but I mean, he was such a great lyricist, and he still is, you know, but he's just he's gone mad. You know?
Jesus, I'm freaking. I've had such a weekend. I think I must be turning to God.
I mean, you toured relentlessly, didn't you? I mean, there was no part of the country or that you hadn't seen, and you were, you know, you would drive to venues and just not have anywhere to sleep for the night and just try and find somewhere to go.
Well, from about 93, where we first started we started making these demo tapes. Back in the day, we would have cassettes. So we'd go to this studio in Edinburgh, and we'd work on our music, and like a lot of kind of, how would you say, bedroom bands almost, or like bands that rehearse one now and again and play at someone's birthday party. Once we started recording and got really into it, we actually realised we weren't that bad. We were pretty good, and we had some good songs. So we put them all together on a cassette and got it pressed up, and we had all these cassettes, and the only way really to get rid of the cassettes was to go out and do gigs and sell them. So we decided to do that, because one of the bands that we were always into in the 80s was a band called The Replacements, and they just kind of did that. And Mark was a massive Replacements fan, and he used to keep us all up in it. And he would just say, well, why don't we just start going and playing gigs? Because I think in those days, a lot of bands, you would get your demo tape and send it to a record company guy in London and hope that he would be interested, but we never really bothered with that. We just kind of thought, well, no one's going to bother with this. Let's go and enjoy ourselves. So we started booking. Well, first of all, we were listening to a thing on BBC Radio Scotland, Mark was, and some guy in Sky said he wanted bands to go up and play because they couldn't get enough bands up there. So Mark had replied to this guy, and we went up and played for 2 nights, and had a brilliant time. And we just like played loads of cover versions and did all our own music, and the crowds were great and really appreciative. And we just started, it just snowballed from there. We bought PAs, we bought 2 PA systems with 2 PA systems running at once. And we just turn up in a bar, we set our PA system up, and we start playing our own music, which is quite unusual because most people will do that. They'll turn up in a bar and will play covers, but we would just do it with our own stuff. And but you know, for encores and that, we would throw in like lots of cover versions and stuff. And then we'd sell our CDs and we'd have a mailing list. And after a while, we kind of acquired a following, so to speak, around Scotland, because people would know about us from just playing gigs and the days before the internet and all the rest of it. And then it started. Our manager, who's called Jerry, who's like a sort of friend from school, Jerry just thought, well, why don't we start going to England? You know, we've kind of done lots of stuff in Scotland. And we started going to like places like Manchester, and then London and Oxford and all sorts of other places. We supported Wilco Johnson actually in Leeds at one point. Yeah, we got paid 50 quid for it, but we still thought it was worth doing. And we drove down to Leeds and did this gig, and like spoke to Wilco and chatted with him, and it was the bassist of the Blockheads. It was his bassist, and we just chatted with him. We just used to do stuff like that, really, just for fun. It was a sort of adventure. I mean, it all became like a job as well, because none of us could hold down jobs at that point because we were always gigging or recording, and so we had to kind of devote our lives to it, really. And it all snowballed and became. So by the time we signed to EMI, we'd done about 300 gigs. I don't know. Mark used to keep notes of set lists and stuff, but I don't know if he still does. But by about 95, which would have been about 2.5 years later, we'd done about 300 gigs, and all sorts of places. We'd played at the Phoenix Festival and Teen the Park as an unsigned band, and we'd actually done quite a lot, you know, before we even got involved with EMI, or Food. So, you know, and then once we get involved with Food, we were just touring all the time. It was like non-stop, really.
What was that meeting like with Food Records then? Did they come and did they send the A&R scouts out to see you, or did you? What was it like?
Well, no, we sent we had a CD release called Let It Bleed, which was a pun on the Rolling Stones' Let It Bleed. So we didn't put a sheep in the front, but we were going to. But it was just, and we sent that CD down to Andy at Food, because by the time, just before Andy came to see us, Jerry had started he'd started getting interest from record companies. Someone came from Teen the Park from Warner Brothers and was interested in signing us, and then Andy appeared from Food. Andy Ross, the guy who's signed Blur and Jesus Jones and Idlewild and a whole lot of bands, you know. So Andy, he turned up. He was supposed to turn up when we were playing at the Dublin Castle at one point in the middle of summer. I'm digressing here, but we'd done a tour, and Jerry suggested that we just do a tour of the south of England with tents. So we were like camping and stuff with like burners and with a transit van, and we all slept in tents. But Alan, our drummer, who was very rock and roll, he refused to get in a tent, and he basically just slept in the back of the van. We were in campsites with families and all this, you know, having their summer holidays, and we were wearing all these women's clothes and stuff, and Alan was wearing makeup, and it was just a weird scene. You know, people were just looking at us thinking, what's going on? Why are these guys camping, but then they're getting in a transit van and going away? I think they might have thought we were burglars or something, going out at night. But so we did a tour. It was about a week, and we played in Torquay and Falmouth, and we'd hand out leaflets in the afternoon, and people would come down and see us at night. So that had all gone really well. And the last night of the tour, or the second last night of this little tour, was Jerry had got us a gig in the Dublin Castle in Camden, where it was about 95, summer of 95. And so we did that gig, and Andy was supposed to come and see us, but we get kind of cheated, because somebody obviously realised he was coming and got us moved on the bill to another slot an hour later. So he or half an hour earlier, I can't remember. So he missed us. But Jerry then, I think Jerry spoke to him and said, "Well, we'll come down again." So the next time he came to see us, in Fulham, like a pub full of Chelsea supporters, which was weird. And he really liked it, and sort of said he was really interested in the band and so on. And it kind of snowballed from there. You know, at that point he was, in fact, the week he came to see us, it was the week of Blur and Oasis with the, what do you call it? You know, the thing with the two singles.
Oh yeah.
But and he was telling us all about this stuff and all the rest of it. So we were just kind of like laughing, thinking, "Oh, what's going on here?" And Andy's a great guy. You know, he still is, but he came to see us and really liked the band and really liked our songs, and you know, thought we had a certain amount of potential. I actually thought he was a tramp because he was so badly dressed. So I don't know if you'll use that word anymore, but he had this old Financial Times, and he came up and he kind of hit me in the chest with it, and I said, "No, I don't want to buy your newspaper, mate." And I was kind of watching my Telecasters, because I was thinking, is he going to try and take them? So we were like, but then he was like, you know, I couldn't really understand, because it was loud music, and then he's got a funny way of talking as well, so it was hard to understand what he was saying. But eventually we deciphered that he liked the band and thought we had potential and all the rest of it. So yeah, it all worked out well.
And that sort of studio time afterwards, what was that like? I mean, in terms of like getting that album ready for release.
Well, we'd worked in a studio called Split Level ourselves with a guy called Neil, and we'd kind of taught ourselves a whole lot of studio techniques. And so when we actually started trying to record, first of all, we started trying to record with a guy called Phil Vinyl, who produced the Auteurs and Pulp, and I can't remember who else, Gene, people like that. So Phil had us up at Fish's studio. Fish, the guy from Marrillion, had a studio in a place called Haddington, just outside of Edinburgh. So we went there for a week just before Christmas in 1995. It was a pretty weird experience. Fish's wife was there. She was the woman from the Kayleigh video. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but there's this German model looking through a fence. So she ended up marrying her. So she was what we get dumped on this place, and she was walking about cooking his food in like leather trousers, and the whole band were all just like, didn't know what to say. We were basically all young boys. This German model dolloped in like pasta with meat on our plates. You know, we'd sitting fantasizing about her. And so basically, so we tried recording in this place, and it didn't really go well, because I don't think Phil was a good producer, but we weren't the right kind of band for him. We weren't very disciplined. The band were lacking in a wee bit of discipline. One morning I went, the last day I went in, and I get up at 8 o'clock, went into the recording room. Well, it was about not 8, it was about 9 or 10, it wouldn't have been 8. That's like normal people's time. And Phil was sitting banging his head on the desk, and I was like, "What's up, Phil?" And he just went, this just isn't working, James." And I was like, "All right, why don't we try something?" And the band had all stayed up. They'd all stayed up at night during the night watching, because Fish had left all these DVDs of himself playing concerts in like Rotterdam and like Gdansk, playing Marrillion songs. And they all got right into this for some weird reason. I wasn't. They were all sitting up all night thinking. I was trying to stay sharp. I wasn't interested. But it was just that it didn't really work out. And the second last night, I walked. Fish had come home from a tour, and I kind of walked by because the recording complex was kind of connected to his house, and I walked by his like living room, and he had his patio doors open. He was drinking a whiskey, and he was actually singing. He was actually singing Kaylee a cappella to himself. It's just like pure rock star stuff, you know what I mean? So so that didn't work out at all. We got the mic. When Andy heard the mix, he just said, "No, that's absolute garbage. You've just wasted £5,000 or whatever it cost."
Yeah.
So Andy was in touch with this guy called Pete Smith, who was the producer. He'd done the 2 Squeeze albums in the 90s, which are both really good albums. But Pete had also worked with Sting, and he'd done like the live version of Synchronicity and all that stuff with the Police. So that was quite cool. But he'd also worked with a guy called Chris de Burgh. I don't know if you ever heard of him.
Oh yeah.
So Andy would say, "Well, I've got this guy, Chris de Burgh guy. He wants to work with you." And obviously it was probably because we had a little bit in common with Squeeze, but we were just Chris de Burgh. We didn't want anything to do with Pete because of that those words. And I actually went and bought a Chris de Burgh Chris de Burgh CD to listen to, but we were going somewhere to do a gig, and I broke it when I was cleaning the van from the window with the snow. So we never got to hear what he sounded like, but we kind of. I just knew that. I just heard that song, "A Snowman Came Traveling" or something like that. I don't know what. I think that might be the title of it. Obviously, so all that kind of. So we were like, "This guy's going to be terrible." He's not. But actually, when Pete went in the studio with us, he was brilliant. He totally knocked us into shape. We were really undisciplined, and it was a bit like when you're a kid and you play football and you get a manager. You get one of these kind of young guys who thinks they're a manager managing a kid under 14s team.
Yeah.
Starts shouting at everyone. That's what Pete was like. At first, he had to knock us all into shape, and he'd just did arguments with everyone. Just like the first day we were in, Alan was playing the drums, and Pete was just like, "You're playing that too fast. Nobody plays a song at 140 BPM." And Alan just like threw his drumsticks at him and went out the studio for 2 hours. And then when he came back, Pete had somehow magically kind of got him to go in the room and do his drums perfectly. And he did this with everyone. He just kind of like worked on them, and eventually kind of knocked him into shape. And he was fantastic. He knew how to layer things and get the track sounding big and all the rest of it. And right from the off, he was a really good producer with us. Everyone really worked with him. So, I think it was maybe the Squeeze side of things. It was, better than Chris de Burgh side of what he was doing.
Yeah. The album did really well, didn't it? I mean, it got some great reviews.
Yeah, I mean, it did. It got really good reviews, and it got in the charts, and some of the singles did really well. Like "Smell" did really well in Japan and stuff, and a lot of the songs did pretty well. Yeah, it was quite unexpected, because we always each kind of step, we always thought, this is all going to fall apart, and we're going to go back to playing in Sky soon. So we just kind of like, this all happened and we didn't really expect it, But I mean, I suppose we did a lot of work and a lot of gigging and stuff, which kind of spread the word, about the band. So that's kind of one of the reasons why it succeeded.
Oh, the milk on my cornflakes is the same as any other day. It's just me that's been dragged backwards.
Those songs from that album are still, you still hear them around now, don't you? They're used still, and so to have that kind of recognition for some of that writing and the work that you put in must have been amazing.
Yeah, well, I mean, "Smile" is still gets played, and it still gets like, it's always going on compilation albums. And I mean, that song was just before we get signed to Food. we were in the rehearsal rooms in Glasgow, and Ken was just playing around these chords, and I said, that's quite good. Why don't we? I had this other bit that I'd been working on. We joined them both up, and then I started singing sort of rough words, and then we went home because we 2 days rehearsing in a row, and I went home and wrote the words, and then came back in, and everybody said, they're fine. we didn't think much of the song, and even when we were doing the song for the album, we didn't think that much of it. It wasn't our favourite, but it seems, I mean, I suppose it's very catchy, and people seem to, they still like it. I mean, actually, when we were recording in a place called, we were recording in a place called Farnham. We were recording Smile, and we'd kind of built it all up and put the kind of Beach Boys singing on it and the synthesizers and all that. And, we put it up in the big speakers, and it sounded fantastic. And Andy came down. Andy from Food, he came down in the train to Guildford to see us. And he sat down and he listened to it, and then he stood up and says, now I know why I sent you. And we were like, thinking, well, you didn't know already. And it got nominated for Ivor Novello, and it's just a song that's got legs. It's one of those songs that's kind of, seems to sort of, people really like it, and it's just still an evergreen,
Yeah, definitely. It's an indie disco favourite.
Can't knock it, really.
Lightning in a bottle, almost.
Yeah, but 10 years ago, I was at a thing where my kids were really wee, and I was at a thing with Leslie, a girl who used to work at EMI, and Leslie runs this thing called the Baby Disco, and it was like a disco for like toddlers. So I'm sitting there talking to Leslie, and then someone put it on really loud, this toddler disco, and all the toddlers started dancing. But it sounded fantastic. I can see why. I mean, anytime I hear it, it doesn't, I mean, there was a funny one, actually. It was a couple of years ago. Gavin, the drummer, the original drummer. One day we were all going to a rehearsal, and Gav was in getting his haircut just before the rehearsal, and the hairdresser was saying to him, so what are you doing this afternoon? He says, I'm going up to rehearsal rooms to play in a band. And the woman says, that's good. What band is it? And just at that point, it came on the radio for an advert for Arnold Clark. And Gavin turned around to her and went, is that band? And she must have thought, this guy's got mental problems or something. He's telling me that this song that's just come on the radio is so he's in the band that plays this song. So Gavin's like that. Actually, no, I'm in that band, but I'm not going to say anymore because this is just too weird. But so it's just sort of that's a sort of fairly typical example of how strange things are with that song,
Yeah.
Sorry, I was going to say there was another funny one with it where Mark, our bass player, he kind of left the band in about 2000 or 2001 because he had no money, and he went to work in a dry parking cars at a casino. And he said to me one day, I met him a few weeks after he started this job, and he said, I was parking a car and I turned the radio on, the Smile came on, and I just put my head on the steering wheel and started crying. So anyway,
I don't know what to laugh at.
I thought that was funny anyway. I'm not supposed to laugh, but he was laughing.
The touring process for that album must have been relentless as well, because you toured with almost everybody.
Yeah, we did. We did gigs with all sorts of people. We did gigs with people who were our kind of idols, like the Boo Radleys and Paul Weller, and people like that. And we also did a whole lot of gigs with people that we know nothing, like Tina Turner, and I mean, we didn't even know about Robbie Williams. I didn't know anything about his music until we actually started. I didn't even know about Take That, because we were in our own little cocoon. Do you know what I mean? So we didn't really watch Top of the Pops and stuff. We'd be listening to like The Move or whatever, and all that was just over our heads. Mark knew about it all because Mark was Mark used to kind of keep tabs and all sorts of stuff, but we didn't know anything about him. And he offered us we didn't have anything to do for a month. It was October 97. And he had brought an album out, so we thought we'd do this just to see what it's like. So we went and toured with him for a month, which was a bit of a laugh. He was actually really good. This was the weird thing, because we'd seen so many bands, played with lots of bands. You could tell a good band straight away, from someone that was like faking it. So yeah, he was pretty damn good actually. So yeah, loads and loads of people. Who else did we play with? Played with Gene, and we did a lot of one-off gigs with people like Sleeper and so on, and just really all sorts of bands really.
Well, at this time when you were touring, were you thinking about the second album or recording? At the same time, or?
Yeah, well, we were writing all the time, and we had we'd go to this split level in Edinburgh, and we had a lot of demos worked on. But sometimes we didn't actually demo songs. We just record them in the studio. Pete or Andy would just go, they see us playing a song at a gig and they go, yeah, just record that, and we just kind of record it. For instance, I Wasn't Built to Go Up at This Time and Everest and songs like that, they weren't demoed, they were written one week and recorded the next, you know what I mean? Probably, and a lot of the songs I'd just be writing songs all the time really, constantly writing songs, and so was Ken, and we never really stopped. We always kind of kept our hand in, and we'd do songs at sound checks, stuff.
Did the label?
Sorry.
No, sorry. I was going to say, because a lot of the bands I've spoken to on the podcast have said that, well, in those days, that labels weren't necessarily putting you under any pressure to do writing and to get the next record out. Was it the same for you for Food and EMI? Were they relaxed in terms of what you?
Yeah, Yeah, they didn't tell us to do anything. We never get told to remix them. We never had someone coming into the studio and saying, "Can you turn the snare drum up and that?" Or it was always just a case of, that's good. Andy would split songs into 4 types. He would say, that's a single, and then he would say, that's a really good track, but it's not a single. Then he would say, that's a B-side, and he would say, that's rubbish. So he would just let us go and do what we wanted. And the record label, EMI, and that, we just didn't. I think it's different from when I was in the Hussies. We used to be quite pally with Las Vegas, and from reading between the lines with how the record company treated Las Vegas and how compared to the sort of way we did things. Everything was much more relaxed in the 90s, and a lot more, I think, artistic control. I think it's the word. You just kind of did what you wanted, and if it worked, and if it didn't, then you get dropped. I don't think the record company people so much tried to micromanage you. I think maybe they did in the 80s, but in the 90s it was just like, just let the bands do what they want, kind of thing.
Yeah.
For that particular type of music.
That does seem to be. It was the kind of like. The era where British music and pop culture was just going international essentially, and that I guess there was that lots of independent labels, so they never truly are really independent labels, I guess, but there seemed to be freedom, bands galore, and just a lot of opportunities for that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think it was a kind of like a last hurrah, really, wasn't it, for the music industry before it came in. It was definitely the last. It was the last of all the NME type of kind of crazes that the NME had kind of been keeping going since the 60s. They would come up with something and then for a year or two and then move on to another craze. And I think after Britpop, music sort of stopped doing that in Britain a lot. Well, maybe not. Maybe hip hop and like dance music still does it, but guitar music sort of became very kind of, how would you say, it's sort of split and fragmented into all sorts of little things, and it was never really a big movement being controlled by the press, So it was kind of like a last hurrah. There was a whole lot of other like last aspect. There was the last aspect where there was a lot of money around, I think, for bands, and it was also the last era where were using tape and like Pro Tools all the time, things like that, you know. So it was a kind of last thing.
So, what's the future for yourselves then? And obviously everything is put on hold, but you know, post COVID and everything, you know, fingers crossed, everything starts to get back to normal. What's the plan for the Supernaturals in 2021? What's the dream?
Well, we don't we don't really have any dreams. Those were destroyed years ago. But we just kind of work on. We've been working on 2 albums, which we were going to, you know, we got the money to record, but we couldn't get a studio, and we were like, we kind of get caught out by COVID, you know. So we're going to do that. We've got 2 records we're working on, and just before COVID came in, actually, we played with our last gig was with Embrace. So we kind of just still, hopefully, when it comes back, we'll go back to doing things like that, gigs on our own, and the odd kind of support gig here and there. But we don't have any great plans. We just kind of like recording, really, and putting records out. We're not too fussy. Do you know what I mean?
Are the songs coming
try and make them good, and that's about it.
Are the songs coming from a different place, do you think, or are you writing differently nowadays?
I think obviously you mature, or you go, I don't know if you would, I'd use the word mature just to try. You get older, so you can't really sing about certain things anymore, can you? When you just be silly. So you have to try and sing about I mean, was it Paul McCartney? It was about 15 years ago. He brought that album out, Memory Almost Full. Was it that one, or was it the one before it? And I thought that was amazing that he'd written all these songs about his life. I don't know if you've heard it.
Yeah, I think I know of it. Yeah,
a really good album, and he kind of like so you know, he changed his sort of lyrical outlook, and from time to time, I mean, the lyrics will change a bit, and it'll probably maybe be more reflective and more like looking at your life and stuff, and probably looking at things like death and stuff like that. But I think that's just what happens to you if you're still writing songs and you get older. You know, you don't write about like getting crazy with it, being a lazy lover and stuff. You know what I mean? You write about other things.
Last thing from me then, James, and I'll let you go. I always like to ask, what song or songs really do you still love to play live? Is there anything that really is something that completely bowls you over on stage, if you like?
I don't know. I think my favourite song from each of our records to do live would probably be a song called Dung Beetle. I like doing that from the first album. Yeah. And I like a song called Idiot. And I like a song called What We Did Last Summer from the third album. And from the most recent ones, I like a song called Bird of Luck and Horse Song. The other one, those 5 songs. I would just happily do a set of those 5 songs plus Smile. Take the money and run.
Well, James, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you. I really appreciate it. It's been really fascinating to hear about the Supernaturals for past and present, and then hopefully the future. And hopefully I'll be able to get to see you play live again soon if you're coming to Southampton.
Yeah, well, hopefully we do get out, but you know, it's all looking pretty bleak at the moment, you know. But we'll see what happens.
Well, I have everything crossed.
Yeah. Okay, Chris, no bother.
Thanks again to James for speaking to me for the podcast. It was fantastic to speak to him about the Supernaturals. One thing I just wanted to mention on the podcast is Speakeasy Fanzine, which is a Britpop indie fanzine that comes out every month. It's an amazing tactile thing in this digital age, made with love and care and attention. They have great features, interviews with indie legends, looking back at the music from the 90s, and also looking forward to, you know, music now and guitar pop that's being made today, and there's some great bands out there that they're flying the flag for. If you want to get involved in that, visit speakeasyfanzine.bigcartel.com and order some copies from there. Very reasonably priced, and like I say, an amazing thing. And just to reiterate what I said at the beginning of the podcast, please get involved in Back to Britpop by tweeting me, Facebook and Instagram and the Ko-Fi page and anything else you can find me on. Your support is much appreciated. Anyway, hopefully I'll see you again very soon. Take care.